There's a particular kind of silence you only find miles offshore. Not the comfortable quiet of a bedroom at night or the stillness of an empty house. This is different. This is the silence that lives underneath 50-foot swells and howling North Sea wind. The kind of silence that fills the space between a man and the black water, churning 150 feet below his boots. Every guy who's ever worked a night shift on a deep sea rig knows what I'm talking about. You feel it in your chest. Something ancient sitting at the edge of all that darkness, watching. I've been collecting these accounts for a while now. Workers who came off rotation and needed to tell somebody what happened out there. Most of them said the same thing when I asked why they hadn't reported it officially. They'd pause, look at their hands, then say, "Who would believe me?" Tonight, you're going to hear them. Every word, exactly as they were given to me. The first comes from a man named Garrett, a roustabout who spent 11 years working rigs in the Gulf of Mexico before he retired in 2019. He told me this story in the parking lot of a Waffle House in Louisiana. 2 cups of coffee, deep, like he'd been holding it in for a long time. My 3rd year out, I was assigned to a semi-submersible about 90 miles south of Grand Isle. Platform had been running for years without incident. Night crew was small, maybe 14 guys total if you counted maintenance. I was on the overnight equipment check, which meant walking the lower deck alone, running diagnostics on the ballast controls, making sure the pontoons were doing what they were supposed to do. Boring work, repetitive work, the kind of work that makes you forget where you are. I was halfway through my 2nd loop around the lower deck when I noticed it. A sound, not the rig. You learn the rig real fast out there. Every rattle and groan of it becomes as familiar as your own breathing. This was underneath the rig, beneath the water. A low rhythmic knocking, like something large bumping against one of the pontoons from the outside. Deliberate sounding, not a current, not debris. 3 slow knocks, a pause, 3 more. I stood at the railing and shone my flashlight into the water below. Nothing. Black Gulf water, maybe a little phosphorescence way down in the deep. But the knocking kept going. 3 and 3, 3 and 3. For about 40 minutes, I went and got Marcus, one of the crane operators, because I needed somebody else to hear it. We both stood at that railing listening. He looked at me after about 2 minutes and said, "Yeah, I hear it." That's all he said. Neither of us had an explanation. When the morning crew came on, we mentioned it to the platform supervisor, who waved us off and told us it was probably a school of something big passing through. Marcus and I never talked about it again. But I asked around, quietly. 3 other guys on that rig said they'd heard it before. Always at night, always 3 and 3. Garrett didn't have an explanation. He wasn't offering one. That's actually what made it stay with me. The absence of an attempt to explain it away. The next account came from a woman named Dana, a production operator on a North Sea platform off the Scottish coast. She sent me a voice message on my phone at 2 in the morning, which already tells you something about the state she was in when she decided to share it. I want to start by saying I'm not a person who spooks easily. I'm from Aberdeen. I grew up on fishing boats. I've worked offshore for 8 years, and I've seen 100 things that had simple explanations. Gas plumes that looked like figures in the water, spray that looked like hands, that kind of thing. What I'm about to tell you did not have a simple explanation, and I've had 4 years to come up with one. It was winter, late January. Visibility from the platform was basically nothing. You could barely see 10 meters beyond the safety rail, and the sea state was force 7, maybe 8. Standard awful North Sea night. I was doing paperwork in the control room when one of the CCTV monitors caught my eye. The camera's on the lower deck. I nearly dismissed it because the picture quality on those things in bad weather is terrible. Spray and static and weird light artifacts, but I watched it for a few seconds longer. There was something standing on the lower deck. Not a person. I know every silhouette of every piece of equipment on that platform. I know what the crane housing looks like. I know what the valve manifolds look like. This was standing between two sections of pipe, maybe 1.5 meters tall. And it wasn't moving the way a person moves. It wasn't really moving at all, except, and this is the part I keep coming back to, it was oriented toward the camera, like it was looking at the camera. I called the deck supervisor and 2 other guys went down to check. Nothing there. No sign of anything. I reviewed the footage the next morning and whatever I'd seen was gone from the recording. Not wiped, just gone. The camera had been cycling through views automatically, and there were 2 full minutes of that feed missing from the archive. I escalated it to our platform manager and the offshore installation manager. They looked into it and said the deletion was a known bug in the CCTV system. Happened sometimes in extreme weather, they said. Maybe. But I've worked that platform for 3 years since, and the CCTV has never done it again. I thanked Dana and told her I believed her. She said that was the first time anyone had. Now I want to take a moment before the next story because this one is different in a specific way. Most of what workers describe is ambiguous. Sounds, shapes, shadows, the particular uncertainty of perception in an environment designed to disorient you. This next account is not ambiguous. The man who told it to me, a driller named Chet, who did 4 years on a deep water platform in the Norwegian Sea, described something that had a direct physical consequence. Chet said this: there were 2 of us on the helideck at about 2 in the morning, me and a guy named Prashant who was an instrument tech. We weren't supposed to be up there. We'd both finished our shifts early and snuck up to look at the northern lights. It was one of those nights, hors d'ouverture, where the aurora was insane. Green and purple, just pouring across the sky. The helideck was exposed to the weather, but the sea state had calmed, and it was cold but manageable. We were up there maybe 20 minutes just watching the sky. Then Prashant grabbed my arm. He was looking over the side of the helideck, out at the water. I followed his gaze, and there was something in the water about 40-50 meters off the platform. Something large, not a whale. I've seen whales from platforms, and they don't illuminate. Whatever was in the water was giving off light. A deep greenish light from underneath the surface. It was moving. Slowly, in a wide arc around the platform. Not the kind of movement that has a hydrodynamic explanation. Too slow for a marine animal of that size. Too large for any fish I've ever seen documented. The light was maybe 8 or 10 meters across. We watched it for close to 15 minutes. I took my phone out to film it and the phone died. Brand new battery, full charge when I'd left my cabin. Just dead. Prashant's phone also died when he tried. The light circled around to the opposite side of the platform and then descended, slowly, until we couldn't see it anymore. Prashant looked at me and said in a very calm voice, "I'm going to file for a different rotation." He did. He was off the platform within 3 weeks. I stayed for another 6 months, and I never saw anything like that again. But I also never went back up to the helideck at night. Now there's a version of Chet's story that skeptics will land on quickly. Bioluminescence is real. Large organisms create it. There are documented cases of enormous bioluminescent events in the deep sea, particularly in the Norwegian and Barents Seas. But Chet's been offshore for 15 years. He knows what bioluminescence looks like. And he said this wasn't that. What it looked like, he told me, was structured. Like whatever was producing that light had made a decision about where it wanted to go. I'm not in the business of telling you what to believe. I'm in the business of telling you what these men and women said. The fourth account was sent to me as a written document, typed up by a man named Roderick, who spent the better part of a decade working saturation diving support on deep sea rigs. Saturation diving is its own particular horror. Divers live inside pressurized chambers for weeks at a time and descend to depths that would crush the body in minutes without the right equipment. If you want to feel truly alone, become a saturation diver. Roderick had left the industry entirely and was working as a high school shop teacher in Manitoba when he sent me this. I worked support on the SAT system, which means I was on the surface, tending the umbilicals, monitoring communications, managing the bell. The divers go down, I stay up. One night during a deep maintenance dive at around 310 meters, the two divers on the dive, I'll call them Yannick and Saul, were doing inspection work on a wellhead structure, standard stuff. Visibility down there is always poor, but that night they said it was unusually clear. Saul was recording with a helmet camera. About 40 minutes into the dive, Yannick stopped responding to comm checks. Not static, not interference. He just stopped answering. Saul, on a separate circuit, told us Yannick had gone completely still, just stopped moving. Standing on the wellhead platform with his arms at his sides, Saul tried to physically get his attention and Yannick didn't react. For 11 minutes, Yannick was completely unresponsive. Then, like someone had hit a switch, he turned and resumed the inspection like nothing had happened. We hauled them both up and went through decompression. When Yannick was out and cleared, we debriefed him. He had no memory of those 11 minutes. None at all. Not even a gap in his memory. To him, the dive was continuous. He went from one point in the inspection directly to the next, with no elapsed time in between. We reviewed Saul's helmet camera footage from those 11 minutes. I watched it myself. Yannick standing still, Saul moving around him, trying to get a response. And then, in the background of the footage, at the absolute edge of Saul's light cone, something that I cannot describe to you in terms that I'm confident are accurate, because I've never seen anything like it before or since. A shape, tall, motionless, too far into the darkness for the camera to resolve it properly. It appeared in the footage for a total of about 90 seconds, and then was gone. Yannick left the saturation diving industry 6 months later. He said it wasn't because of the incident on the dive. He said he just needed a change. Maybe that's true. Roderick told me he thinks about that shape in the footage at least once a week. He said he thinks about it when he's standing in front of his students and suddenly the room feels too big and the darkness outside the classroom windows feels too close. There's one more I want to leave you with. It's the one I think about most. It came from a man named Emmett. And unlike the others, Emmett doesn't have a tidy end to his story. No transition out of the industry. No cathartic decision to walk away. He still works offshore. He's out there right now, probably, on some platform in some black stretch of ocean. Emmett told me that about 2 years into his time on the rigs, he started having the same dream. He'd be on the lower deck at night alone, and he'd look over the side into the water. And in the water, he could see lights. Deep down, far below the platform, moving slowly upward. And in the dream, he always felt the same thing. Not fear, not dread, something worse. recognition. Like whatever was coming up from below knew him, like it had always known him. He said he told a buddy about the dream once, and the buddy had gone quiet and then said, "Man, I've had that exact dream. Same lights, same feeling." Emmett didn't make anything of it at first. Dreams are just dreams. But then a few months later, on a particularly still night, he was standing alone at the railing of the lower deck, and he looked over the side and saw, not in a dream, standing awake at 2 a.m, a faint light deep below, moving slowly upward. He walked away from the railing and he went inside, and he didn't sleep for the rest of the shift. He told me he still thinks about what would have happened if he'd stayed, if he'd kept watching, if whatever was in the water had broken the surface while he was standing there alone with the dark ocean all around him and 300 miles between him and shore. He said he thinks the smart thing, the only right thing, was to walk away, to not see it fully. Because some things out there in the deep, you are not meant to witness completely. The knowing of them, he said, is the thing that follows you home. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'll tell you this. Every time I get on a plane at night and look out the window at the black ocean far below, I think about Emmett standing at that railing, and I think about whatever it was down there in all that dark water, moving slowly upward toward the light. Sleep well.